Our next speaker is Tag Elhazin. I'm very glad that he has made it. And he is a retired Canadian academic. He worked on water and human resources and energy projects in Sudan, Sweden, Germany, Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, Kenya, Eritrea and Chad, Nigeria, and Canada and the United Kingdom. He is a member of the Alternative Dispute Resolution Institute of Canada and the International Institute for Strategic Studies, London, UK. He worked in the educational consultancy fields in various capacities in Canada, South Sudan, Oxfam, UNICEF, USA. His other interests, among many, is conflict analysis and resolution. So, Taj, you have half an hour.
Okay, no, I will not exceed the time. I'm a disciplined man.
Oh, good.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Before I go into the nitty-gritty of my presentation, I want to clear some semantics. When people are talking about the SUDD and talking about draining Bahr El Ghazal Basin, they're talking about clearing, which means clearing the aquatic weeds and any debris in the course of the river, the natural course of the river. Clearing and cleaning are synonymous. Dredging is when you are tampering with the bed and the dimensions of the river itself. And dredging and draining are synonymous. When you dredge, you will drain, because then you are increasing the capacity of conduit, and there is water on the sides in the SUDD. So this water is going to come into this channel and it will go downstream. And it will result in deepening the channel of the river. When we talk about waterways, this is what the Council of Ministers in South Sudan is talking about now. Once you have the word ways, it is like highway. Once you have the word way or ways, then you are talking about A to B. So clearing for navigation, it means you need to clear for the waterways. And here I would stop. This does not need to go deep, because the River Transport Corporation was established in 1912 by the British occupation and the Egyptians. It became operational in 1913. Every year until 2011, the River Transport Corporation used to clear the waterways, and that means they remove the aquatic weeds, the trunks, and whatever have you. And the next term is culverts and bridges. And a culvert is an opening in a construction to take water across a road or a building or whatever it is from A to B. And this is one of the major problems of flooding, is that the culverts are not enough to pass the water on the upstream to the downstream. And the last thing that I will detail later on is evidence-based credible feasibility study. It is not only economic, it is not only social. It has to be, there are 13 areas of research if you want to have a credible study. The SUDD is a Ramsar wetland preserve, and it was enacted in 2006. And this link will take you to all the details of the SUDD. So international law is coming into play here. And to register UNESCO, to register the SUDD land as UNESCO World Heritage, this is in progress now, and it's not approved. Tampering with the SUDD might jeopardize this registration. Compared to the Okavango of Botswana, which is also a World Heritage since 2014, the SUDD is the largest wetlands in all of Africa. Here I just wish to inform our audience of the Convention on Succession of States in Respect of Treaties, 1978 in Vienna. This is important for the abominable 1959 agreement between Sudan and Egypt that drained all the rights of the other 11 countries on the Nile waters. So what is the situation with South Sudan that had the SUDD, and they were part of Sudan when the 1959 agreement was signed? Where do they stand now? What are the rights and obligations? And I wish to allude to the arrogance of the 1959 agreement between Sudan and Egypt. It divided the entire discharge of the Nile waters, which was estimated at 85 billion or 44 billion cubic meters, between the two countries. 18.5 billion for Sudan and 55.5 billion cubic meters for Egypt. And the annual loss was estimated at 10 billion, to evaporation and whatever have you, was estimated at 10 billion. But then the agreement goes on, and I'm quoting, Sudan in agreement with Egypt will construct projects that would enhance the Nile flow by preventing evaporation losses in the swamps of the White Nile located in the southern Sudan. The cost and benefit of same to be divided equally between them. This is what I call new colonization. Right. Someone in the audience or out of the audience might ask, what do we have a SUDD? And this profile was drawn actually very many years back. It is very accurate. And this is where the SUDD is. The reason why we have that is that there is this dump in the river profile. And as you can see, it all flows down with different gradients. But when it comes here between Merlut and Malik, there is this depression, and this is why you have the SUDD. And because of the northern winds and because of the water in the SUDD, we have what we call the green belt. And the green belt is western Equatoria and northern Uganda. You never hear of a drought, you never hear of a famine in those places. And the reason is there is plenty of rainfall thanks to the SUDD, which is the western floodplains and the eastern floodplains. This is a geological map that was drawn by the French very many years back, I believe in the 70s. And it shows where the underground water is, what we call Umrawaba series. It's where underground water is aplenty. And I have no empirical evidence, but the stories go that the feeding of this aquifer, the SUDD has quite a bit to do with it. The catchment of the wetlands is estimated as 30,000 to 70,000 square kilometers. Different estimates, different times. The actual flood reservoir is estimated as 30,000 square kilometers. 14,000 square kilometers of that is seasonal, with peak discharge around August, and the rest is permanent. 16,000 is permanently flooded. The estimated quantity of water in the SUDD is 30 billion cubic meters, or 1/3 of the total discharge at the high dam. Who owns the SUDD water? Legally, after 2011, the independence of South Sudan. The 1929 agreement between Egypt and Britain is silent on that, although the idea of Jonglei Canal was developed in 1904. The 1959 agreement talks about sharing any additional discharge from projects or natural rises in Lake Victoria 50-50 between Sudan and Egypt. But the issue of rights and ownership of the source of additional water is not specified. The 2005 CPA is silent about stagnant water rights, as the issue could have torpedoed the talks under the IGAD. And it was John Garang who said, let sleeping dogs lie. By default, the stagnant SUDD waters belong to the people of South Sudan. They originate in South Sudan and they reside in South Sudan. Bahr El Ghazal Basin is made of Siu, Busari, Jur, Lul, Tonj, Ragab Zarga, Bongo, Geti, Get, Woko, Naam, and Kir. 100% originating and running in South Sudan. That's the water of the people of South Sudan. Huge spillover from Bahr El Ghazal Basin just north of Shambi. Estimated area of the basin, as we said before, is 16, this is Bahr El Ghazal, it is 16,800 square kilometers. And the total discharge of Bahr El Ghazal basin is about 15 billion cubic meters of water, the same as the SUDD basin. Warrap and lakes are pastoralist land, and we'll come to that later on. The SUDD basin is the forgotten illegitimate child. Nobody talks about Sudan basin. The Bahr River originates in Ethiopia and the Bibor originates in Sudan, and together they form the SUDD. If the Bahr is dammed up the highlands in Ethiopia, we can reserve 12 billion cubic meters and irrigate all Jonglei plains. That's the initial size of the Jazeera plantations in the north. And we can put hydroelectricity roughly about 250, 270 megawatts in that. Jonglei Canal is what I call the elephant in the room. In 1904, Sir William Gastrand, under Secretary of State for Public Works in Egypt, visited the area and published the Ferris Memo. Hence, the Jonglei Canal since 1904 is a colonial project, and Jonglei Canal remains a colonial project today. Gastrand recommended excavating a new canal of about 240 kilometers, which was later extended to 360 kilometers. Murdoch MacDonald presenting a plan for buildings in Nar Dam, Jabal Awliya Dam, and a diversion canal in the swamps. The plan was presented by Egypt to Sudan in 1938. At that time, Sudan was still a colony. Egypt became independent in 1936. Egypt, since the invasion of Alexander the Great in 342 BC, never slept a night as an independent country until 1936 AD. In 1945, a research team was formed by the government of Sudan to study the available plans of the project. 1946, things started to be serious. 1959, the catastrophe of the new colonization, and the Egypt-Sudan Joint Technical Commission for the Nile waters was established in 1969, and now it has been revitalized. 1974 was the final approval, and then the digging started through a joint venture between Italy and France and a company called Compagnie Construction d'International. And they brought a huge machine from Pakistan that dug 260 of the 360 kilometers of the canal against the wish of the people of South Sudan and the advice of international organizations about the delicate ecosystem, and a lot of precious blood was spilled through the forcible disbursement of the people of South Sudan when they protested against the canal. This is the canal. These are the two proposed channels for the canal. Ethiopia, what I call the African guardians of the Nile. They were the African guardians of Africa when in 1896, the forces of Menelik II and his queen conquered the Italians, 12,000 of them, killing 8,000 and capturing the rest, and some of them went in disarray. It was the only pride of Africa beating an invading European force. In 1926, Ethiopia addressed the League of Nations protesting the UK-Italy hegemony. In 1927, President Coolidge of the United States supported a small dam at the cost of $10 to $15 million. But then, and the design was being undertaken by a company called G.J. White Engineering. But then the project was torpedoed when the Italians ransacked Ethiopia. The impact is actually qualitative, not quantitative, without full credible feasibility study. So I cannot say this is the impact, otherwise I'll be cheating myself and cheating others. And I don't see it really as our job to do it. We did not start a dilemma. We want to keep our water. Go home. I mean, leave me alone. If you want to dig a canal, you, Egypt or Sudan or anybody else, convince me that there is something in it for me. This has not happened until now. The fallacy that if we drain the SUDD, we can irrigate. You do this when you have a high density of population and you don't have land. But we have a lot of, look at Jonglei Plains. That's equal to the entire size of the Jazeera plantations in the north. So South Sudan is not short of land. So that argument is not valid. What is the whole purpose? It is to take 4.8 billion cubic meters of water annually from the 30 billion cubic meters, or 16%. And you can start crying over a mug of beer if that kind of water is drained away. When we talk about feasibility study, it is not only economic, it is not only social. I mean, we should not cheat the people. As scientists and academicians and professionals, honesty is #1 criteria. What we need is an economic impact and value added feasibility study. Cost and benefit feasibility study. Peace and conflict impact assessment, because the pastoralists are moving east and west there, and they are moving north and south. Ecological and environmental impact assessment. Social impact assessment. Best alternative study and assessment. Is there an alternative? If there is something in it for me. Women's lens, and goodness gracious about women's lens. Nobody cares about that. What is the specific impact on women? And they are a disadvantaged category of population in South Sudan. Livelihood impact assessment. Pastoralism in South Sudan, about 50% of the people in South Sudan are engaged in pastoralism or are dependent on pastoralism. What is going to happen to them? Impact on wildlife. Just look at the scores and scores of animals moving east and west between Ethiopia, Buma, and the Sud. Where are they going to go? Health impact assessment. Collateral damage impact assessment, because then the rains in Western Equatoria are not going to be the same. Water security impact assessment. Water security is part of national security. Political risk impact assessment. Unintended negative impacts. What are they going to be? So don't just give me the 1 or 2 likely suspects, that economic and social. No, there are 13 of them. Anyone who wants that water should conducting these feasibility studies by impartial, independent bodies, and it has got to be in the interest of South Sudan. If there is a will, if tomorrow I become the president of South Sudan, let me tell you what I will do. I will get 5 CAT D10 T2 dozers. I will get 5 CAT D11 CD dozers. I will get 3 motor graders, 140 all-wheel drive, 4-wheel tractors, 4 truck front-end loaders, 3 truck excavators, 10 dump trucks, 20 cubic meters capacity, and I will backfill the goddamn 260 kilometers dug and wipe out Jonglei Canal off the surface of Earth. Now, this is a story of sadness and a story of heroism and bravery. This is the machine that brought in by CCI, not ICC, CCI, Company Construction International, and it dug the 230 kilometers. Why is it like that? John Garang commanded William Nyun and one of his colleagues, Carbino Quanin. They were from Battalion 104 and 105 of the Sudanese Armed Forces that went into mutiny, and they came and dynamited the machine. They disabled it. Great. Bravo. That's the way to do things. They did not stop there. They captured 5 Italians and French. I think they were all French. And Dr. Justin Yaj at that time was the representative of the SPLM, SPLA in France. So he worked tirelessly to release the 5 Khawajas. And John Garang insisted that the company has got to turn over all the Caterpillar machinery to the SPLA. And they did. If I recall right, there were over 40 D8s, D9s, D7s, whatever have you. And the SPLA got a fleet of equipment. And I will rest there, and if there are any questions, you are more than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for charting the history of the Jonglei Canal. I think there is one issue. The Jonglei Canal is a part of Nimeri's policies of turning the Sudan into the breadbasket of the world. And hence IMF, World Bank, other financial institutions pumped money, which Sudan suffer at the moment, $64 billion debt. That is the origin of it. That's the money which was given. Anyhow, you may come to this point later. Thank you. Now we come to question and answer. Richard.
Thank you. So if we could take a question from the audience in the room first, please,
Yes.
for Taj, and please, if you can frame your question concisely and as much as possible as a question, and say who your question is for. If you'd like to introduce yourself when asking your question, please do.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Farouk Abdurrahman. I have a question to Tag Elhazin. You remember possibly we met last time in Doha, was 30 years ago, in 19. Yes, that was not the first time, but the last time we met in Doha. Anyway, I enjoyed very much listening to your this assessment about the Jonglei Canal. I thought at the time it was a good project, but you convinced me that it was not a viable thing. At the same time, these days, recently, with the problem between Ethiopia and Egypt on the Renaissance Dam, which is being now built in Ethiopia, it's already functioning now, the Egyptians are telling themselves again that they can do something else by getting water on the White Nile this time, forgetting about the Blue Nile, and getting water, imagine, from the Congo River, which is far away, into the Sudan, through the South Sudan, and then again straight into a Dabba bend of the Nile. What do you think of this? I think they're just, I don't know, they're trying to ease their population that they can get enough water from the White Nile and from the Congo River. What do you think of that?
Thank you, Farouk, for that question. And Taj, before I pass to you, there's one question online where addressed to you, somebody was asking whether about the differences between dredging and digging, if there was anything further to say about that. Over to you, Taj.
Sure, I will take them both. Let me take the first question first. In the early 80s, Boutros Ghali, who later became the Secretary General of the UN, was state minister. Being a Copt, he was state minister of foreign affairs. And he came up with a project called the Ndugu. And Ndugu in Kiswahili means brotherhood. And he was hopping from one country to the other, trying to create a connection and trying to woe with the African countries of the Nile Basin into this Ndugu. And then came 1988 and the floods. And Lake Nasser filled to the brim 174 billion cubic meters of water. And Boutros Ghali dropped the Ndugu project like a hot potato. So there is a phobia, and I don't blame them. About 95–96% of Egypt's water needs are coming from the Nile. President Sisi tried to innovate and use desalination, which is very expensive. And there was just a report in Africa Financial that these desalination plants are actually drying up. and less than 1% of their needs was produced by this massive investment. So yes, I think they will go out of their way. They will go to the possible and the impossible, the doable and the undoable, so that they can increase the discharge that comes into them, and that's 55.5 billion cubic meters. Let me just veer a little bit of the 12.5 billion cubic meters of Sudan. And some people doubt me on that, but I have it on the record from authorities that Sudan never used more than 12 billion out of the 18.5 billion. So 6.5 billion cubic meters were going to Egypt every year free of charge. With the GERD, Sudan can agree with Ethiopia because the lake behind the dam, the reservoir is very large, 74 billion cubic meters. An agreement could be struck in good time to store this excess water. So I differentiate between water politics and water policies, and there is quite a bit of issues within water politics. For the first question, which I tried to explain at the outset, when you are dredging, just look at the equipment that the Egyptians brought into South Sudan behind the back of a lot of responsible people. They came through Argin in the north, and I got the bill of lading from Argin. All across Sudan, they were captured by the Miseria in South Kordofan. They had to pay a ransom of about $50,000. They brought the equipment into Rapcona, Bentiu, which is Unity State, and then they brought in very heavy cranes. Part of that equipment, which is on the back of 21 12-meter trailers, is 2 drag line. Each of them is 50 tons weight and has an outreach of 12 meters. The bucket can reach out for 12 meters. With a bucket that reaches out 12 meters, you can dig down 8 meters. That's not for de-weeding. That's not for, it cannot be for aquatic weeds. So that's the objective. And regardless of what the respectable brother, Dr. Ahmed said, the Jonglei Canal project was a colonial project, is 1907. That is documented. This library of about 1,500, 1,600 books is a testimony to that. Most of it is actually about that area. So dredging is actually for draining water. The two words are synonymous, and that's what we don't want. And now we are fighting the use of these 2 drag lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Taj. I'll pass back to the audience in the room in Oxford if there are more questions, please.
My name is Marcelina. It's really a very simplistic question to Taj. Given the fact that this huge amount of money, 60 million or billion, whatever it is, that has been lost during the Jonglei Canal digging, was brought at the time when Sudan and South Sudan was one country, by people or the government that was oppressing the Sudan. Should we foot this bill as South Sudanese? Thank you.
Marcelina, that's very good, very short and very precise. Thank you.
Marcia, it wasn't totally clear. Were you saying that given that a lot of money was spent on the Jonglei project in the 1970s and 1980s, were you saying that should there therefore be some compensation for South Sudan? Or could you clarify your question, please?
The fact that that huge amount of money was sort of levied on us by Sudan at the time when South Sudan and Sudan was one country, by a regime to which we were not comfortably subscribing to, should South Sudan foot this bill?
Should South Sudan foot the bill? I mean, if there is a bill, as far as I know at the moment, the national debt of Sudan, no debt has been allocated to South Sudan. So South Sudan, as an independent country post 2011, isn't carrying any bill or cost. Taj, any over to you?
Yes, no, this if I may, I mean, I would like to comment to the respectable speaker that Sudan and South Sudan, Ethiopia, these are not nation states. Japan is a nation state. Bangladesh is a nation state. 98% are Bengal. Portugal is a nation state. And when you have a state, but not a nation state, you always have these troubles. I lived in South Sudan and I go to South Sudan since 1972, May 1972. And in many cases, the Dinka and the Nuer of the Eastern Nile do not even know that the Dinka and Nuer of the Western Nile even exist. So the issue of identity is really a very big problem for all these African countries. There are only 3 countries in Africa that are nation states: Swaziland, Lesotho, and Egypt. That's it. Every other country is a state, but not a nation state. And a lot of work needs to be done. In the mid 2000, 2004, 2005, shortly after the CPA, it was actually the Americans who said, let us take all the donations, let us take all the oil money, and let us build a network of communication so that we have physical connectivity between the different parts of South Sudan. They realized that Dinkas are Dinkas, Nuers and Nuers, Nankatoms are Nankatoms, and they're going to stay like that. So this is a very big issue, and I think it is worth further exploration. Thank you.
Thank you, Taj. And I'll use that as an opportunity to pass to the audience if there are more questions from the audience in the room, please.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Justin Mott. I have 2 questions. I'm excited because there's so many questions we can ask, but obviously time restricted. Dr. Taj, I don't know if you were offered South Sudanese citizenship, because you've all often expressed opinions that our leaders don't express. We all, and I think for most South Sudanese I know, I'm in love with you. You've really demonstrated humanity in its true sense, because as much as you may be North Sudanese, you are actually still you still see South Sudan as an extension of the old Sudan, so that you're really somebody who doesn't want to see South Sudan suffer, and we really salute you for that. I often worry about your security, because the poor thing we know on the planet is really you've taken Egypt head on, and you've really tried to roll back the illing both Sudan and South Sudan for that matter. So that's just on a side issue. But what do you think? How would this thing be resolved eventually? Clearly, Egypt has expansionist ideas of new, wants to clearly be the big kid on the block and bully everybody. North Sudan has accepted that. South Sudan, we expected our leaders to resist it. Unfortunately, they haven't. How do you think this problem of the water will be resolved eventually?
This is actually a kind message to the organizers. The issue of sanctions, United States sanctions and UN sanctions on South Sudan, needs quite a bit of effort from us at the intellectual level and the practical level. The sanctions have 3 benchmarks, and each benchmark has a number of requisitions. If we take the one where there was some progress, and that's child soldiers, Sudan has not signed on the Vancouver Principles until today. And without signing on those principles, God knows if anybody would want to go and investigate. They are crippling South Sudan. 3 of the sanctioned people in South Sudan are actually in high-ranking offices in South Sudan. So, and unless the sanctions are removed, unless the benchmarks are met, the sanctions are not going to be removed. I hope in the future that this could be the topic for an intellectual debate like that, because South Sudan hasn't got the capacity, and the framework of today, the status quo, does not allow them to actually meet the benchmarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taj.